And good afternoon, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Welcome to another edition of Steelers Brunch with Tony. Thank you, as always, for joining me out there in the live chat and everywhere. And happy Labor Day. And before I get started, as always, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel where we bring you podcasts each and every day. There's the Standard is the Standard. There's the Steelers Preview. There's the Stat Geek, the Big Bro SCO show, hosted by co-editor, Behind the Steel Curtain co-editor Dave Schofield and his big brother Rich. I finally have his first name. I finally remember his first name, Rich. There's the Live Mic, hosted every Friday evening by Behind the Steel Curtain deputy editor Michael Beck. He also co-hosts the it's now called Know Your Enemy with Jeffrey Benedict every Wednesday. I think it's at 9:00. There is Steelers Q&A every Monday at 5 with yours truly and Brian Anthony Davis. And starting next week, the day after the Steelers and Giants game, it'll revert back over to the Steelers Hangover where we discuss that game, and that'll be the same format each and every week after the day after a Steelers game. And then there's the Let's Ride, hosted every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday by Behind the Steel Curtain co-editor Jeff Hartman, and that's audio only. And the Retro Show, which will be every Tuesday with Brian Anthony Davis and me. So there's plenty out there for you as far as podcasts, and you can, in addition to YouTube, you can find the audio versions on just about any platform where you can listen to podcasts. There's Spotify, there's Stitcher, there's Google, just about everywhere. And of course, please check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website, where we bring you breaking news every day. We bring you commentary. We bring you, as is the case today, we're tracking the Steelers cuts as they make their cuts down to the final 53 as they prepare for the 2020 regular season. So please check that out. And thank you all for joining me in the live chat. We have many familiar faces: Dave Shipley, Jared Devil, Matty Peverall, Donald Nolan, Steelers Pittsburgh. The list goes on and on. Ezra, James Caldwell. So thank you all for joining me. And this is a pretty big day for me. It's like I feel like Walter Cronkite presiding over a very big moment. I get to talk about the Steelers as they cut down their roster from 80 to 53, which has to be finalized by 4 p.m. today. And not much news coming out in that regard yet, other than Tuzar Skipper. He was last year's preseason darling, the winner of the Isaac Redman Award, the Behind Steel Curtain Isaac Redman Award that we always hand out to that year's camp darling, preseason darling. And he made the roster last year, but he was quickly cut, and he was picked up by the Giants, and they cut him during the season, and then he was re-signed by the Steelers, and of course, word came out last night that he was once again cut. And I guess there's a bit of a moral to that story, and that's the preseason isn't everything. And last year, if you remember, I think he had 4 or 5 sacks during the preseason, and I remember his last Labor Day at this time on the Q&A. We were both Brian and I were just amazed. We were flabbergasted that Skipper was cut, and of course they re-signed him, and there was hope that he could make that leap this year and build on that potential he showed last summer. You know, he's an undrafted free agent out of Kent State, I want to say, and but it just didn't happen. I don't know why. Maybe he's just a he hasn't learned the playbook. Maybe he's not good with the details, as Mike Tomlin likes to say. He's not on the details. Maybe he doesn't like to play within the framework of a team defense. Maybe he's just not very good against people that aren't fellow down the liners that you would meet in a preseason game, guys that are undrafted free agents or lower round draft picks. It could be any number of reasons, but I guess with that cut, that tells me that Ola Denny is going to make the team again. I would assume, because you're not going to go into the season with 3 outside linebackers. We already know Alex Highsmith is going to make the team. In fact, from what I understand, listening to some of the insiders, like oh gosh, who was the guy's name? That doesn't matter. But one of the Ray Fittipaldo of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, he was on with on the Fan yesterday talking about Alex Highsmith, and they asked him if he thought that they would have if he would have a role in the defense other than special teams, and he said, yeah, he thinks he's gonna get see some playing time, so that's encouraging. So that tells me that he's going to be your primary backup at outside linebacker, and I guess Ola would be the fourth. So that's the first big cut to come along to come down the pike, and it'll be interesting to see who else gets the axe. I mean, I don't expect any other huge surprises. Any big name guys like a Alejandro Villanueva, since he's a veteran, and he makes a nice buck. I don't expect them to cut somebody like that, or even Jalen Samuels. I know a lot of people are expecting him to get cut, but I think they're going to keep him around for another year. And I think they're going to keep Ryan Switzer. I think he'll make it as the 5th receiver. And if they do keep 6, it sounds like Deion Kane is in line to be the number 6 guy. And as far as like the secondary is concerned, there's an undrafted free agent, James Pierre, that's all of a sudden getting a lot of positive publicity. So there's talk that he's gonna make the final cut and be a backup cornerback for them. And Marcus Allen, it looks like he's going to survive for a 3rd year, and looks like his role is going to be expanded. He's going to play they're going to expect him to play more of a hybrid, dime linebacker, in the box safety. So that's interesting. And when it comes to a guy like Antoine Brooks, the 6th round pick out of Maryland, is he going to make the team? We haven't heard a whole lot about him at all throughout camp. Or is he going to be cut? Is he going to go to the practice squad, or are they going to keep him around and cut somebody like Jordan Dangerfield, who I think we pretty much know what he can do as a safety. He's pretty much his strength is run as a run stopper. He's not much of a coverage guy, and he's more of a special teams guy. So, maybe they decide that, look, we know we have with Jordan Dangerfield. He's already reached his potential. He's already tapped out his potential. Let's see what we have with this Antoine Brooks, and let's keep him on the roster. Or maybe, since this is the year that you can add just about anybody to the practice squad, maybe if they're afraid to lose an Antoine Brooks, maybe they really like him and they think they can develop him, and they're afraid to lose him. Maybe they work out something with Dangerfield, and they sign him to the practice squad for a year, and they protect Brooks on their 53-man roster. I mean, there's a lot of interesting choices, a lot of interesting decisions. Does Big Dan McCullers make the team? Does Jordan Dangerfield's job safe as the punter, or do they go with the Corliss Waitman? I think that's how you say his name. We haven't heard much from him as far as how he's been doing at camp, right? I mean, there's a lot of unknowns. What about this? Isn't really a matter of any cuts, but who's going to ultimately win the right tackle spot between Shuk Okorafor and Zach Banner? Yesterday at his press conference after training camp practice, after his final practice at training camp, Tomlin was non-committal. He wouldn't commit to either guy as winning the job. So it doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned who wins that job. What I'm more worried about is, was it a quality competition? Was it a close competition, and for all the right reasons? And because you want the winner of that job to provide you the same level of performance as Matt Filer the last couple of years, and before him, Marcus Gilbert, who had evolved into one of the better right tackles in the game before injuries derailed his career in Pittsburgh. So, and the loser of that competition is going to be your swing tackle, your backup tackle, and your jumbo tight end. And possibly, I mentioned Big Al at the beginning of the show. He's going to be your possibly that could be his replacement at left tackle if the Steelers want to maybe move on from Villanueva next year. As we've mentioned several times, they have a lot of tough decisions to make as far as their salary cap over the next year or two with the presumed drop in the salary from 198 to maybe 175, but certainly somewhere in between 198 and 175 next year. So a lot of interesting decisions, and that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. I think it speaks a lot to the kind of team that the Steelers have, that they don't have a lot of tough decisions as far as cut down. There's not going to be a lot of surprises, right? So as they prepare for the 2020 season, the fact that there aren't a lot of surprises, even though they have missed the playoffs 2 years in a row, I think that speaks well for them. I mean, you might say, well, why did they miss the playoffs the last 2 years? Well, I think last year was pretty obvious why they missed the playoffs. They were without their best player, their quarterback, so that contributed. They probably would have made it if Ben Roethlisberger was healthy, but I think there's a lot of hope for them for 2020. I think as they round out their final 53-man roster, and even let's be real, even after today, they're probably gonna make more changes before the Giants game, because they do every year. They're gonna probably cut somebody that just barely made the roster today and pick up somebody else. I saw that Sean Davis, who was a starter here for a number of years, he was cut by the Redskins, and if they can get him back at a vet minimum, maybe he received a $2 million signing bonus from Washington. So maybe they can get him on the cheap for a year. And here's a guy who would, you're talking about depth. I mean, he started at strong safety, he started at free safety for them, and he even played the slot corner early in his career, his rookie year back in 2016, before he made the permanent switch to safety. So he offers position flexibility for them. So maybe that's somebody that they, there's been a lot of positive things said about Curtis Riley, the veteran that they picked up from the Raiders, and that he could be the veteran backup that they need at safety. But maybe they like Sean Davis better. They're more comfortable with him. That he was in their system for 4 years. So we'll see. So it's not, even after today, there will still be more decisions made on their roster. And the next thing I want to talk about is the lack of injuries so far in training camp, or not so far. Training camp's over, but throughout training camp, you didn't hear a whole heck of a lot. Just your typical bumps and bruises that you normally hear about, and the players normally get during camp. The only significant injury, or at least as far as whether he'll be available for week 1, is David DeCastro. He's been out since most of the padded practices, from what I believe, and I know he left practice recently with an undisclosed injury. I don't know what the injury is, and as of his press conference yesterday, Mike Tomlin said that it's still up in the air as to whether or not DeCastro can go next week against the Giants. I mean, that's probably something, what Tomlin usually says. We'll let the week speak to us, in terms of his availability. So, but the good news is they do have a veteran like Stefan Wisniewski, and that's why you bring a guy like that in as a free agent. It's not a sexy signing. It doesn't help you win free agency, right? But you need a guy like that throughout the course. You usually do anyway, throughout the course of a year, to start a game or two in the event of an injury. I mean, they lost B.J. Finney, and they knew they had to get a guy like that, like him, a quality backup to replace him, and they did. So Wisniewski can play right or left guard. He can play center. So if he had to play for an extended period of time, would you notice a drop off from DeCastro? Probably. I mean, DeCastro is their best lineman, and he's this era's Alan Faneca, and when his career is finally over, he's probably going to be a borderline Hall of Famer, a guy that makes the the list every year, like Faneca has for the past few years. So yeah, you would notice a drop off over the course of over an extended period of time. But for a game or two, a guy like Wisniewski is invaluable. He's somebody that you want on your team. He's somebody that could save your bacon, so to speak, like a D'Angelo Williams did for them at running back a few years ago when Le'Veon Bell was suspended and he was injured. So that's why it's not always about winning free agency. It's about signing the right kind of guys that can help you throughout the course of the year. And I just wanted to, before I lose it in time, I wanted to get a super chat question from Dave Shipley, since it's a $5 donation, and we thank you for that. Thank you, Dave. It's always awesome when you're so generous. Do you think the Giants pick up Skipper for inside knowledge? I don't know. I mean, they had him last year, and then he went to New York. I don't know what else. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I can see them doing that, but I don't know how much inside information a guy like Tuzar Skipper is going to be able to provide. So, do I see it happening? Possibly. Do I think it's going to be effective? Not necessarily. No. But thank you for that question. So that takes care of that part. To sum it all up, it's great to have a veteran like Wisniewski because you're probably going to need him more than once throughout the course of the year. Pouncey has had injury issues throughout his career, and it's you never know when a Matt Father is going to go down. Just so to have a guy like a veteran like that who's been around the league, who started in 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls, including last year's for Kansas City, it's comforting. It's comforting to have a guy like that. So I don't think, even if the Castro can't go against the Giants, I think the Steelers will be in pretty good shape. So that's if that's the worst injury news that came out of training camp, then the Steelers are going into the regular season in really great shape from a health standpoint. So that's the second thing I want to talk about. And the third thing is, as always, every time there's every time a big name becomes available, fans want the Steelers to sign that guy. You heard a little bit of it when Earl Thomas was cut a couple weeks ago by the Ravens, but not that much. But certainly last week when Leonard Fournette was cut by the Jaguars, running back, a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon of wanting Pittsburgh to sign him. And I get it. I get why the media and the fans are so eager for the Steelers to sign these big name players, because you want your team to have the best possible chance of winning. I get that. But when it comes to a guy like a Leonard Fournette or Earl Thomas or whomever, you have to ask yourself, is that position that this guy plays for, is it a liability for your team? It's not necessarily a matter of a Leonard Fournette being an upgrade at running back, because of course I think he was the 4th overall pick in 2016. To say that he's not a more talented running back than a James Conner, that'd be a little dishonest. We've seen what the guy's been able to do so far during his career. He's a really good running back. The question becomes, is the running back position that much of a liability for Pittsburgh that they need to go out and get a guy like that? That they need to go out and perhaps overspend to get him? Because is he gonna? I think he signed with the Bucs, or he was going to sign with the Bucs. But as of last week, people wanted the Steelers to get him, and what would his role be here? Would he be a starter? Are you going to just say, we like what you've done over the last few years, James Conner, but we're going to make we like what you've done throughout all throughout training camp, and you're a popular guy on the team, and you're becoming a team leader, but we want you to take a back seat now to this new guy, Leonard Fournette, because we think he can help us more than you. Are they going to do that? And is Fournette going to accept the backup role here? Probably not. I mean, we saw what happened with LeGarrette Blount back in 2014 when he signed here to be the backup to provide adequate depth, but he was not happy with his role because Le'Veon Bell was the ultimate workhorse while he was here until, obviously in between suspensions and his injuries, he was the guy. There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of room for for backup reps behind Le'Veon Bell. So with Leonard Fournette at this point of his career, heading into his year 4, year 5, would he be willing to accept a backup role? And I don't think he would. So from that standpoint, it wouldn't make any sense. And just from the strength of your position, do you need a guy like that? And I don't really think that they do have to go chasing a guy like Leonard Fournette right now. A player like Earl Thomas or Jamal Adams when he wanted out of New York a month or so ago. That might have made sense a few years ago when you were dealing with guys like Mike Mitchell and even Sean Davis as your safeties, but not now. I mean, your secondary is not a liability anymore; it's a strength. So you don't need to go out and get a guy like an Earl Thomas who's had his share of problems, or a player like Jamal Adams who wanted out of New York primarily because he wanted a new contract and they weren't willing to give him one yet. You know, he was still on his rookie deal and he wanted a new one. And do you want to take on that kind of a potential headache? You know, so a player like Micah Fitzpatrick a year ago at this time, when you had Sean Davis as and Terrell Edmonds, and you had and Davis was injured, and you had a chance to really upgrade your position and bring a difference maker into that secondary, a guy that could be one of the best at his position. Yeah, well, they already did that. You know, they brought in Fitzpatrick. There's no need to do that again. A few years ago, when you're coming off of that horrible AFC Championship game against the Patriots, when your secondary was exposed, and you had guys like Ross Cockrell back there and Willie Gay, who was getting long in the tooth. A guy like Joe Hayden suddenly becomes available, and you do something uncharacteristic, and you aggressively go after that guy and you sign him. But if a veteran cornerback became available right now, a guy the caliber of Joe Hayden, you don't even think about it because you don't need him anymore. You have Steven Nelson, and of course you have Hayden, and you have Mike Hilton as your slot corner, so you don't need to worry about a guy like that. So again, it's always intriguing to think about these big name players. I mean, I was reading an article on Facebook, a Steelers article about TJ Watt, and the comment section had like 5 or 6 comments about how they should go out and sign Adrian Peterson, who was cut by Washington yesterday. You know, I mean, fans are always gonna be enamored with those big name players, but it's not necessarily about building, you know, an all-star roster. It's about finding 53 players that work together as a team, you know, that are good in team defense, for example, in the secondary, that know how to play great team defense, that know how to play, that are willing to, like, for example, a receiver or a tight end. Is that guy willing to dedicate himself to blocking, or does he just want his numbers, right? So it's not always about going out and getting a fantasy football team. It's about finding the best pieces that fit together for your team and for your schemes and the direction you want to go as a football team. So that's going to do it for part 1 of this edition of Steelers Brunch with Tony. And I thank you for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, stay with me. But if you were listening to the first half of the show on one of the many podcasting platforms, please download part 2. And I'll be back shortly for part 2 of Steelers Brunch with Tony. And I'm back. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for joining me on this fine Saturday afternoon, this fine Labor Day weekend. I hope everybody's having a fantastic Labor Day weekend, and I hope the remainder of your Labor Day weekend is a great one. And I just want to touch on a couple more things in this half of the show before I open things up to questions. And the next thing I want to talk about, and I love this topic because I love Steelers history and think back to some of my favorite times, and that's why I love doing the new show with Brian every Tuesday morning. I think it's going to be changed to a different day during the regular season, but I'm not sure yet. I think I discussed it with Brian, and shame on me for not remembering, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be changed to a different day. So stay tuned. We'll announce that. But either way, it's a thrill to do that show because it takes me back to some of my most my fondest memories as a Steelers fan. And I realized something over the last few weeks because I've been watching a lot of old games involving Bill Cowher because we did the wild card game against the Browns. We did that game a couple weeks ago. We did we talked about the thrilling regular season win against the Patriots back in 1997. It was sort of a prelude to another exciting game against the Patriots in the playoffs a few weeks later. And of course, this week I'm watching a game against the Bengals. It was a kind of a fun comeback against the Bengals in 1995, where they were down by 18 points and they wound up winning by 18 points at Old Riverfront Stadium. It was one of my favorite Bengals games, Steeler Bengals games, forever, of all time, of course, because it was such a thrilling comeback, and it was almost embarrassing at the end how they were dominating them after being embarrassed early in that game. But like watching these last three games and covering these last three games, it reminds me of how much I love Bill Cowher and his mannerisms and his enthusiasm and everything that he helped accomplish here as the Steelers coach for 15 years. And I often forget about that because I spend so much time defending Mike Tomlin, and often at Bill Cowher's expense, because I find myself repeatedly bringing up Cowher's flaws when he was here as the head coach. And make the mistake about it, he had his flaws. He had his critics. He had his detractors. And basically, he had the same kind of reputation that Mike Tomlin has now. He had that same kind of reputation all throughout his coaching career up until he won Super Bowl 40. And a lot of people, I realize that might be hard to believe or remember for a lot of people, but it's the truth. Now we talk about Bill Cowher. He's practically canonized in Steeler Nation. He's that guy you see on the meme, you always see on Facebook. Am I going to have to come back and straighten things out? He's the perfect head coach. He never made any mistakes, but he certainly had his less than stellar moments when he was here, and especially in the late 90s. I don't know if anybody remembers the late 90s, or if anybody's from Pittsburgh, and if anybody was living in Pittsburgh during that time. But it was I hate to sound overly dramatic because we are just talking about football, but from a pure Steelers fan standpoint, from as following the team, it was a pretty chaotic time in the late 90s because they just had their 6-year run from 92 through 97 when they were a legit Super Bowl contender, and they made several AFC championship games. They made it to the Super Bowl 30, but they came up short each year. They fell short every season, each one of those seasons. And then finally, the floor dropped out in 1998. They back then, the Steelers didn't really go out of their way to sign their free agents. They tried to do like a college football system where they would draft players and develop them, and then after a few years, they would become the starters once these high-priced free agents left. But you can only do that for so long before it catches up to you. I mean, they lost guys like practically their whole receiving core. Andre Hastings, Ernie Mills, and then finally Yancey Thigpen. They lost Leon Searcy, who was Bill Cowher's first draft pick. He was a starting right tackle. They lost him to free agency. They ultimately lost John Jackson. They lost Chad Brown, who they might have re-signed had they known that Greg Lloyd, who they already had signed to a deal, had they known that he would have so many injury problems and ultimately have to leave after the 97 season. They let Rod Woodson walk. There were so many guys that they left walk. And of course, there were a lot of coaching changes, assistant coaches, coordinating changes. So after that 97 season, it looked like the train was going to continue on, and they were going to continue to be successful and that 98 season started out fairly well. They were 7-4. They were in first place by Thanksgiving, and then again the bottom dropped out, and Cordell went from being the toast of the town. One summer, I swear to God, I was out hitting golf balls with my uncle. We were at a driving range, and everywhere you looked, it was either right before the AFC Championship game or after when they lost to Denver. It was around that time when Cordell was slashed and everybody loved him. There were number 10 jerseys everywhere. Well, by like 98, he was public enemy number 1, and Cowher did him no favors, but with the way he handled him, Chan Gailey left after 97. He was his first offensive coordinator as a starter. He left to be the Cowboys coach. That happens. They brought in Ray Sherman the next year. He only lasted a year. It just did not work out with him. If you remember Ray Sherman, he filled in as the receivers coach last year after the unfortunate passing of Darryl Drake. So Ray Sherman was the coordinator in 98, then he left. And that was Kevin Gilbride for a couple of years, and that really didn't work. And during that time frame, Stewart was he lost his job. It was Mike Tomczak as the starter. It went so far that it got so bad that Stewart was banished from the quarterback meetings, and he was just allowed to go to the receivers meetings. He was only a receiver at that point. In 2000, they signed Kent Graham, and he somehow won the starting job in the preseason. And that's an indictment of Cordell, too. I mean, let's be honest. If you can't beat out Kent Graham, that says something. But he lost. He was not the starter, or Kent Graham was the starter at the beginning of the 2000 season before Stewart finally was named the starter later in the year. And ultimately, he went through 4 offensive coordinators over the course of 5 years. He went from Gailey to Sherman to Gilbride to Mike Mularkey. Finally, in 2001, that seemed to work out a little bit better. But could you imagine that today? If there were 4, if the Steelers went through 4 coordinators in a half a decade, it would just be chaos, right? And then, so there was that situation, and how the fans quickly turned on Stewart, and there were these vicious rumors about his sexuality, not that there was anybody's business, but if it were true, but people tried to for some reason they tried to weaponize that and use it against him, simply because he was having his struggles as a quarterback. I mean, and of course there were the racial issues with Stewart. I mean, I listen to a lot of talk radio. I've been listening to talk radio since high school, and I remember listening to Stan and Guy on the radio, and Mark Madden, Myron Cope, the post-game shows to Copacabana with Tunch-Ilkin, and time again, people would call in, they'd begin to say something about Stewart, and then the call would be dropped because they were saying something. Who knows what they were saying? I can only imagine. But it was an ugly side of Pittsburgh that I only heard about as a kid, but I got to experience as an adult. And of course, there were rumors about Bill Cowher during that time. These rumors they never made it to the news or the newspaper. They were just word of mouth with the fans. I don't know how they got started, but there were rumors that Cowher was cheating on his wife. I heard it on the bus one day coming home from Pitt when I worked at Pitt. I said, I got to get home and watch the news or listen to the radio, and there was nothing about it. And I asked my boss about it the next day at Pitt. And here's a guy that he was on Thomas Starzl's transplant team in the 80s. Thomas Starzl at one time was the most high-profile doctor in the world, probably. He was a transplant pioneer. And my old boss at Pitt worked on his transplant team in the 80s. And he even said, oh, yeah, I know a guy who knows for a fact that Cowher was cheating on his wife. Again, not that this was anybody's business if it were true, but people were trying to weaponize it because they were just disgusted with Bill Cowher and the fact that he came up short, and the fact that the war of attrition in terms of letting all the free agents leave, how it finally caught up to the team. And there was a point between the Thanksgiving game in 1998, the famous Jerome Bettis coin toss game, where he said tails, and the Steelers lost that game. Well, from that point through early 2000, they lost 18 out of 24 games. I mean, it was ugly, right? And there was a very public power struggle between Cowher and Tom Donahoe, who was he was back then. The Steelers didn't like to call anybody their general manager. He was the director of player personnel, but he was essentially the general manager. And him and Cowher hated each other, and the Rooneys almost chose Donahoe over Cowher, but it could have very easily went that way, but they stuck with Cowher. And there were, Cowher wasn't the friendliest with the media. We talk about Tomlin today being gruff with the media, but Cowher was the same way, arguing with reporters. And Myron Cope in his book often talked about how Cowher would argue with him in between segments of the Bill Cowher show. And Stan Savran said the same thing about how Cowher would be really confrontational in between takes. Don't ask me that question ever again, that kind of thing. So, I mean, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. And that's why when people say to me today, when they say, you don't think Tomlin should be fired? I say no, because I remember how things were back then. And I remember how Cowher got through all that. I mean, it was really ugly around here in terms of, I mean, there were rumors it was that Cowher was not easy to work with for his assistant coaches. A lot of guys left, like Dick LeBeau, who was the defensive coordinator in the mid-90s. He left to take essentially the same job in Cincinnati. I mean, he eventually became their head coach. So maybe he had aspirations and he thought that would be a good way to become a head coach. But it seemed weird at the time that he would take a lateral move to go work for the lowly Bungles, right? Even though he did have a history with them, still, it just seemed strange. And so the point is, Cowher got through all that, and he rebuilt the roster. And, eventually, as we know, they won Super Bowl 40. So when he left after the 2006 season, I was worried. I mean, I'm somebody who appreciates consistency when it comes to the teams that I follow. I mean, maybe they don't always reach their highest potential, which is disappointing. But there's something to be said for consistency year in and year out, knowing that your team has the right guy in place to keep your, even if you have some down years, he's gonna build the team back up again. So when he left after 15 years, I was pretty worried. I mean, ask Pitt basketball fans about that. Jamie Dixon, who kind of built on what Ben Howland started back in the early 2000s. He's the greatest coach in Pitt history, but a lot of fans and a lot of alumni were becoming disgruntled with him because he could never quite get them over the top. He never got them to a Final Four. The furthest they got under him was the Elite Eight back in 2009. So, eventually he finally said, all right, you want me to go? I'll leave. And he left, and he went to become the head coach at TCU. And I mean, Pitt basketball really, really bottomed out. And it looks like they got lucky with Jeff Capels, who looks like he could be he could take the program. He could bring the program back to where it was in its glory days of the 2000s. But, I mean, be careful what you wish for sometimes. So when people say, do you think Cowher will be fired if the Steelers don't make the playoffs this year? I say no. I think it would take several years of really several bad seasons for them to decide to move on from him. And I think it's a good, like, if you think back to the late 90s and how ugly things were, it makes the 2019 offseason seem like nothing. I mean, we wanted to print out T-shirts. Never forget 2019 offseason, how bad it was. But there have been so many bad and tumultuous times in Steelers history you don't even know about because social media didn't exist. Now everybody has a platform. Everybody has a way to share their opinion, and everybody's opinion about everything all the time. Whereas back then, you didn't get to hear what everybody thought about every little thing, because social media didn't exist. But had social media been around in the late 90s and the early 2000s, when all this craziness was taking place, and after Cowher's first playoff run, I mean, it would have been pretty eye-opening, I'm guessing, right? And people, and again, if you think I'm crazy, I'm not. I remember it. I wish I could travel more, and I wish I had more money and I could travel the country more. But one of the benefits of living in Pittsburgh my whole life is I remember just about everything that's happened with the team since 1980 when I was a little kid. And believe me when I tell you, um, all the criticisms that Tomlin is facing right now or has faced over the past decade or so, Cowher had the same problem. You know, he was too much of a player's coach. He could never win the big games. He was horrible at clock management. It was all the same thing. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is just because things seem bad, or not that they're bad now, but they've seemed pretty chaotic in recent times. It's nothing different than when it was in the late 90s or even the 80s with Chuck Noll. And the Brunies went to him a number of times and said, look, you got to change your assistant. You got to fire some assistant coaches or you might lose your job. Dan Rooney fired his own brother, Art Jr., who was the head of the scouting department. He said, we're just not getting it done here. We have to make a change. And I mean, could you imagine that happening today? I mean, it would be like the biggest Steelers story ever, right? If Art II had to fire one of his relatives, the 70s, when Chuck Noll was sued by George Atkinson because he said the Raiders were a criminal element, and then under oath he had to admit that guys like Mel Blount, his own players, were part of the criminal element in the NFL. And as you might expect, Mel Blount didn't take that too kindly, and there were holdouts, and of course the famous story of Ernie Holmes shooting at a helicopter after a police chase. So I mean, it's like what I always Randy Grossman. I remember reading a quote from him and a Jim O'Brien book I read from like 2010, I think it was. And Randy Grossman's quote was, "Anybody who thinks the good old days were all that great are only kidding themselves." So, so the next time you say, should Mike Tomlin be fired? No, not really. I just think about what that would mean and the potential upheaval that could cause. And look at the teams that are constantly firing their coaches and how much success they have. And it's not very much success. So I just wanted to talk about one more thing before I open it up to some questions. And that's, we finally made it. The off season is officially over, right? If today's cutdown day, that means everything after this is going to be all about the New York Giants, the Steelers' first opponent next week. So that means we're officially in the regular season. And I mean, it was touch and go with the pandemic. It was touch and go for a while there, whether we would have a regular season. And we're still not out of the woods. I mean, don't get me wrong. It could just take one outbreak from one team and it might ruin everything. And it might be postponed, and who knows what's going to happen. I still don't know how they're going to handle like a Florida Marlins situation or a St. Louis Cardinals situation where there's a massive outbreak on a team. If it were to come to that, I don't know what the NFL would do other than make that team forfeit. So we're not out of the woods, but we are into the regular season. And this Thursday, it'll be the Chiefs and the Texans, and then, of course, next Monday night, it'll be the Steelers and the Giants at the Meadowlands or MetLife Stadium, I should say. But I'm really looking forward to next Sunday, believe it or not. That's the day I'm really looking forward to, when I get to sit in my recliner. My recliner is like 10 feet away, 20 feet, 15 feet away in my living room over there, and just watch one game after another. The 1 o'clock game, the 4 o'clock game, and the 8 o'clock game. I just can't wait. I mean, it's been quite a year for all of us, right? Life's just been insane, but to have something to look forward to, like my favorite sport, which is football in the NFL, I never thought we would make it here, and here we are. So give yourselves a hand. You made it to the regular season. So those are all the topics I want to talk about today, and now I will open things up to some questions. So let's see what we have here in the live chat. Pardon me while I scroll down a little bit. Here we go. All right. excuse me while I'm looking for some questions, I'll bring up some comments. Here's one from Donald Nolan. I like growth from within. I like Sean Surratt taking over for Munchak as the offensive line coach in 2019. Surratt got several years in house before promotion. Much better than searching NFL for potential fits. I agree. I mean, that's something that not all teams do. He was sort of like a protege of Munchak, and he learned under him. And if you can't learn under Munchak, you can't learn under anybody. He's arguably the greatest offensive line coach who's ever lived. So if he didn't gain anything from that experience, then shame on him. So here's one from Maddie Peverall. Tony, who is your roster must and miss? Must and miss? I'm not sure. I don't quite understand that question, Maddie. Please elaborate, and I'll get back to you. Here's another comment from Donald Nolan. If Tomlin gets more Super Bowl wins than Noel, which coach goes down as greatest Steelers coach ever? Well, I mean, that's just a matter of opinion. Tomlin's already lost the Super Bowl, as did Cowher, whereas Chuck Noll never did. So he'll always have that feather in his cap. But if he goes on to win 5 Super Bowls, he'll certainly carve out a nice little place for himself, not only in Steelers history but in NFL history. I mean, he'll create a legacy that at this point only Bill Belichick's been able to achieve. Here's here's one from Mark Tobin. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with the live chat here. It's going too fast for me. You guys are really asking questions. Okay. Would you agree Tomlin's legacy is on the line to win a Super Bowl with talent he drafted and a team he built himself with Colbert? Well, as far as public perception, the whole he won with Cowher's players thing that people never let go of. A lot of people are still are still beating that drum. 12 years after Super Bowl 43. I mean, yeah, it's probably a bit on the line, but I'll also say this: if Tomlin were to quit today and never win another Super Bowl, I almost guarantee you, people are going to be comparing the next guy to him and saying it was so much better when Tomlin was around, because it's like that old saying, you never know what you got until it's gone. And I think it was the same way under Cowher. He was under constant criticism until he finally won Super Bowl 40. Whereas Tomlin's already won a Super Bowl, and people aren't giving him credit for it. So in a way, you're right. His legacy, at the very least, will be cemented if he wins another one, because people can never say that he won with somebody else's players. All right. Here's a comment from Ezra. Boy, these comments are really moving fast today. Steelers storybook ending. Ben and Tomlin win the next 2 Super Bowls. Well, yeah, I think it'd be a storybook ending no matter what if that happens. Here's one from Mr. Marcus, a comment. Tomlin is doing a hell of a job. Well, I agree. I mean, again, it's tough to find that kind of consistency in the NFL. Like I always say, if you miss on the quarterback and if you miss on the head coach time and time again, chances are your team's going to be in the gutter. It's going to be in bad shape. So if you can't get one or both of those areas of your team right, then you're going to be in trouble. And the Steelers have had they've had the right guy as far as head coach every year since 1969, and as far as the quarterback, they've had the right guy in place since 2004 here. So, the people that always say, "Oh, get rid of this guy," or "Cut Ben, he's old, he's washed up." Well, again, careful what you wish for, because those kind of people, those invaluable members of an organization, aren't that easy to replace. Tony, check the super chat. Did I miss a super chat? I thought I answered one before. Here's one. Okay. Sorry, Dave. Thank you for that $5, and thank you for whoever yelled at me. Thank you for sometimes I need to be I need a kick in the butt. Sometimes I need a pat on the back, but in this case I needed a kick in the butt. So thank you for that. Name a head coach Rooney's fired to the contributors. Oh, they haven't fired anybody since the late '60s. Bill Austin was the last guy that they fired before Chuck Noll. So if that's what you mean, but thank you for that donation, Dave. Here we go. Here's one from Ezra. I knew this would come up. Josh Rosen he's either already been cut or he will be cut. Rosen over Doc Davis over Dangerfield. Well, yeah, I would definitely I wouldn't have a problem with either one of those, to be honest, because I think Davis is a better pure safety than Dangerfield. Dangerfield's a great special teams guy, but when you're talking about like pure quality safety depth, Davis would be certainly an upgrade. And again, he would provide position flexibility. Sorry, I'm talking really fast again. As far as Rosen, I mean, what would it hurt to take a flyer on that guy at this point? You know, once you get to your third string quarterback, you're in trouble anyway. So here's a guy that was a top 10 pick by the Cardinals in 2018. Heading into that draft, he was in contention for the number 1 overall pick. He was as far as the combine passing drills, he was one of the better pure passers in that draft class. But you know, when it comes to it, but it is strange that 1 year after they drafted him 10th overall, the Cardinals decided to cut ties with him and draft Kyler Murray. I mean, you don't usually do that quickly after investing in a quarterback that high in the draft. And he couldn't catch on last year with the Dolphins. You know, the word on Rosen is he has a bad attitude. That's been the book on him since college. So do you want a guy like that? Do you want to bring a guy like that into your system, and a guy that could be potentially be a bad teammate, a guy that's going to be hard to get along with, a guy that's going to be hard to coach? I don't know. But in terms of pure talent and pedigree, I mean, he's worth taking a flyer on as if you want to sign him to the practice squad like they did with Paxton Lynch last year. I mean, what could it hurt? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. And here's a comment from Ezra about Sean Davis. Davis is younger and knows the defense. That's right. And he started both safety positions, and he started as a slot corner in his rookie year. So if he would agree to come here and be the backup, kind of like with Stefan Wisniewski on the line, there's a guy that you'd be comfortable with if he had to step in and start for a game or two, because he's already done that for you. It wouldn't be obviously it'd be a huge drop off from Minka, but excuse me, at least he's done that for you, and he started NFL games, he started playoff games for you. So that's why, you know, quality depth is important. So that's about all I have for today. And I want to thank you all for your questions. Thank you for the super chat donations. And thank you for the interaction. It was fun as always. And I hope you all have a great Labor Day weekend. And I will talk to you on Monday at 5:00 with Brian Anthony Davis, fast talker, on Steelers Q&A. But for now, thank you for watching Steelers Brunch with Tony. Have a great weekend, everybody.